This happened a couple of years ago, right before school ended. It was the last day of 8th grade, filled with the excitement and bittersweet goodbyes you'd expect on the final day of middle school. Everyone was running around, scribbling signatures and cheesy messages in each other's yearbooks. My middle school was huge, easily over 1,000 students. To keep things manageable, the teachers collected our yearbooks and passed them around to different classrooms, ensuring everyone who wanted to could sign. You can imagine how this could create problems. Anyone could write whatever they wanted in anyone's yearbook. The teachers tried their best to prevent things from getting out of hand, but I knew a few kids who wrote mean messages to people they didn't like. At the end of the day, when I got my yearbook back, I flipped through the pages eagerly, reading all the goofy notes from my friends. But as I scanned the pages, something caught my eye. There was a signature below the face of someone I'd never seen before. His name was James Thompson III, a name I'll remember for as long as I live. The message he wrote was short, simple, and honestly a bit unsettling. It read, "Have a great summer. I'll be seeing you again." I stared at the page, utterly confused. I'd never spoken a single word to this James kid. There wasn't much I could do about it, though. The school year was over, so I couldn't confront him even if I wanted to. I chalked it up to some weird kid being weird, or maybe an honest mistake. Either way, I stopped thinking about it. A few hours later, I was at home hosting a sleepover in my basement with my best friends Liam, Noah, and Oliver. The four of us ate Doritos and played Call of Duty all night. My parents' bedroom was 3 floors above us, so we didn't worry much about keeping the noise down. We were messing around on my dad's rowing machine sometime, just before 2 in the morning, when we heard a sharp knock at the storm door. The sound instantly silenced us. Who would knock on the storm door? It must have been someone who didn't want to wake my parents or knew we were down there. Or both. It didn't make sense. The person kept knocking in the same rhythmic pattern. I could tell Oliver was about to say something, and I couldn't stop him in time. In a loud, assertive voice, he asked who was there. I wanted to knock him out. He'd basically broadcasted to whoever was out there that we were down there. My basement has no external windows, so it was unlikely they knew we were there, but now they did. After a long pause and no more knocking, a muffled voice answered back. He said, "Come around to the back door," in a high-pitched, genuinely cheerful voice, like he was a friend trying to join the sleepover. It was definitely a teenager's voice, not someone pretending to raise their pitch. I was pretty scared, I can't lie. My friends seemed unfazed, though, like they thought it was exciting that some random kid was outside my house. They insisted I at least check it out. Even though I didn't wanna, they pressured me into it. We crept upstairs, careful not to make too much noise. I approached the back door slowly, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. Through the narrow glass pane beside it, I could see a shadowy figure standing under the dim light. I got closer, and his face came into view. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized who it was. It was him, James Thompson III, the kid who signed my yearbook. My friends moved to open the door, God knows why, but I stopped them, saying I knew who it was. I explained what had happened, and that changed their mood a bit. Keep in mind, James was still standing outside while we talked, and he could definitely see us. He must have noticed how freaked out I was because he started motioning to the side of the house, like he wanted me to go to the window. You might wonder why we weren't taking the situation more seriously. I think it was because it wasn't some older stranger harassing us. It was a kid from our school. Still, I wasn't opening the door for him. Instead, I went to my kitchen window and cracked it open just a bit. My friends followed and stood off to the side. I asked him what he wanted, saying I recognized him from the yearbook. He said, "Oh, so you got my message," and introduced himself as James. Then he said he always watched me from afar, that we could have been good friends. I agreed just to avoid angering him, but there was zero chance I'd have been friends with this kid under any circumstances. I didn't want to press him right away, but I had to know. So, I asked how he knew where I lived. He didn't respond, and I didn't know what to say. Before I could de-escalate, Noah called him a creepy stalker and told him to get lost. James's smile vanished. He tilted his head like he didn't understand what Noah had said. Then, just as quickly, his expression twisted into something I can only describe as hatred. He went from passive and kind of friendly to aggressive and angry. He started screaming at me, saying he hated my friends and thought we should all die, mentioning my ex and random things he had no right knowing. He reached toward the window and tried to force it open, but I jammed it shut and locked it. He started snarling and banging on it like an animal, 2 seconds away from shattering it. We must have caused quite a commotion because my parents came rushing downstairs, demanding to know why we'd woken them. That's when James ran away. I told my parents what happened as quickly as I could, and my dad raced outside in his underwear. He came back a few minutes later, saying he had no idea where the kid went. I'm not sure why, but my parents didn't call the police. They just told us to go back to sleep and said they'd deal with the school the next morning, giving the kid the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, they contacted the school. That's when we learned the disturbing truth. James had been expelled a few weeks before the year ended and shouldn't have been at school on the last day. Apparently, the yearbooks were printed before his expulsion, which explained why his picture was still included. That meant he had snuck into the school just to write me that message, which freaked me out beyond belief. Despite working with the school to find out more, nobody could track James down. It was like he and his family didn't exist. The whole thing was a big deal, but the school kept it under wraps. To this day, I still don't know how he knew where I lived. That's what freaks me out the most. The running theory is that he was a mentally troubled young boy who took a strange liking to me for some reason and stalked me for who knows how long. My parents were worried for weeks. We don't talk about it anymore because it's uncomfortable, but living in that house has never felt the same since. My friend Ethan is a bit unhinged. When I say a bit, I mean a lot. He's one of those guys who boasts about how crazy and aggressive he is, like it's cool. He's constantly getting into fights, can't keep his mouth shut, and spends more time in the gym than anywhere else, including his own house. There are actually 5 stories about him I could tell, but the scariest one by far is the one you're about to hear. It also directly involves me, and I feel more comfortable telling my own story than someone else's. This happened a couple of weeks ago, the last day of senior year, May 2019. The graduation ceremony was a few days away, so even though classes were done, we still had to stick around. It's tradition for graduating seniors to get drunk on the last day of classes, and that's exactly what we did. There's this huge clock tower in the center of campus where all the seniors gather to drink, and that's where we were at 10 at night. It was packed, with over 1,000 people crammed into that courtyard. It was bittersweet for me, but I think everyone was relieved to have finished finals, which are tough at my school. There are a few other senior traditions I could mention, but I'll keep things concise. There were 6 of us: me, Ben, Jake, Lucas, Mason, and obviously Ethan. I don't think the others would be comfortable with their names out there, so I'm using different names. I should also mention we lived off campus, meaning we had to walk through the city to get home. There are a decent number of homeless people in that city, so it's not rare to encounter them late at night. Anyway, we were heading home from the clock tower when Ethan did some typical Ethan stuff. It wasn't really his fault, but that's beside the point. As we crossed the street, a random homeless guy ran up to our group and started acting erratic. Usually, the homeless people around here keep to themselves, often too caught up in their own world to notice others. But this guy clearly wanted to engage. He stood in the middle of the crosswalk, yelling at us like a bridge troll guarding the other side of the street. We laughed a little and started walking in a wide semicircle around him to avoid trouble. Everyone did this except Ethan. Instead of disengaging, he started yelling back, telling the guy to get out of the street and stop harassing strangers. The man didn't like that and took a few aggressive steps toward Ethan. That's when the rest of us jumped in to prevent a fight. We must have intimidated the man because he stopped charging and went back to yelling. I pulled Ethan out of the street, trying to get him to behave, but he pushed my hand away. Before any of us could react, he charged full speed at the man, screaming wildly. The man started running away, which made Ethan stop and laugh. I know it's wrong, but the scene was genuinely funny, as messed up as it was, like charging into a flock of birds and watching them scatter. We continued walking toward our house, but after a few minutes, we noticed the man was following us. When he caught us looking back, he started yelling about how we'd made a big mistake and how he was going to call a niche, whatever that meant. We started heckling him back, hoping he'd get scared and leave, but I'm pretty sure we only made his tantrum worse. I'm not proud of everything that happened that night, but we were about to graduate from a prestigious university and had been celebrating with alcohol all night, so we weren't in the right headspace to handle the situation properly. About a block from our house, we realized the man was still following, though a bit farther back. I told the others I wasn't comfortable leading him to our house, and they agreed. Naturally, Ethan took off toward the man before we could decide what to do. He sprinted at him again, and the man fled in the opposite direction. Ethan turned and jogged back to us, and we all jogged up the street. We thought that was the end of it. We made it back to our house, confident we hadn't been followed this time. I'm not going to detail what we did at the house. Let's just say it was a level of chaos I won't be repeating anytime soon. I can't even tell you what time it was. I was stumbling out the front door to pick up my DoorDash when I noticed something odd. The side gate to our backyard was wide open. It was strange because we used a piece of twine to keep it shut, so the gate being open meant someone had deliberately undone it. I instantly made the connection. It was probably that man from earlier. I had enough sense to connect the dots, but not enough to react wisely. The smart thing would have been to alert my friends, but my drunken self decided to investigate. I put the DoorDash on the porch and went around the house, trying to walk straight. I turned the corner into the backyard, and before I could see anything, I felt a rope around my throat. I flailed wildly, but it was no use. Someone was strangling me from behind, and I couldn't do anything about it. I felt the rope's frayed ends digging into my throat as he tightened it with all his strength. I genuinely thought I was going to die. With all my might, I swung my legs backward, and he lost his footing. We both hit the ground, and I could breathe again, but he was still on top of me. In a fit of rage, he clawed at my face, and I felt blood streaming down my cheeks. I threw him off, and he got to his feet before running out of sight. I'll keep things brief from here. I ended up at the hospital that night. The cuts weren't bad, but I needed several shots to protect against any diseases the man might have had. The police were less than helpful, and since I was moving out a week later, there wasn't much I could do. The worst part was having visible cuts in all my graduation photos. Ethan felt so bad he took me to a nice restaurant, but I never held it against him. I just hope he's learned not to antagonize people who have nothing to lose. When I was in 7th grade, there was a kid named Nathan in my homeroom. To put it mildly, he was a bit strange. He was one of those kids who didn't socialize, even though people often tried to include him. I didn't have all my classes with him, but I remember he always sat in the same spot in every room, the back corner opposite the door. Without fail, he'd show up to school in the exact same outfit every day: cargo shorts and an oversized burgundy hoodie. He didn't talk much, but when he had to answer a question or read a passage, he had a deep voice that other kids often mocked. I don't recall him having any friends, which made sense. One time, my friend Aiden caught him slicing worms during recess, and I'm pretty sure he got detention for it. Speaking of recess, Nathan would spend the entire period by himself next to the fence bordering the woods. He never played games or did anything remotely kid-like. He'd just stand there, doing who knows what. Some friends claimed to have seen him talking to someone on the other side of the fence, but I never saw it myself, so I won't spread rumors. I'm trying to think of other relevant details about him. He had several quirks and odd habits, typical of a strange middle schooler, but none are crucial to this story. This happened on the last day of school. I went to a big middle school with many kids per grade, so there were tons of concurrent classes with students from the same year. Because of that, there was a tradition where students would sneak into random classrooms to mess with the teachers. I'm pretty sure the teachers knew about it and played along to amuse the kids, but that's beside the point. I don't recall the exact time, but I was in one of the few classes I shared with Nathan. Everything was as it had been all day. The class was mixed up with random students who were supposed to be elsewhere. I was a stickler for rules growing up, that's just how I was raised. So, I never joined in the shenanigans. My friends did though, so I was often alone in class since they went to other rooms together. This was one of those times. All my friends had left, and the only kid I knew even a little was Nathan. Nathan was acting stranger than usual that day. I remember that distinctly. I can't fully recall what we were learning, but I do remember Nathan tapping his foot aggressively, something he never did. He was also constantly looking around the room, as if searching for someone or keeping tabs on something. I don't think he was watching me, but I couldn't be sure. There were also a lot more kids in the class I didn't recognize. One or two unfamiliar faces weren't unusual since everything was mixed up, but the odds of so many strangers were slim. At some point, the teacher, I think her name was Miss Carter, told us to form groups of 3 or 4 for an end-of-year reflection worksheet. It wasn't serious, most kids just used it as an excuse to talk and mess around. At one point, Miss Carter walked to her desk, picked up the classroom phone, and turned her back to us. A few minutes later, another teacher, probably from the next room, showed up. They stepped just outside the door and started whispering. It was a short conversation, maybe 30 seconds, but something about it felt off, like they were trying not to cause a scene. I could tell something was up. Miss Carter looked uneasy. That's the best way to describe her demeanor. After they finished talking, Miss Carter and the other teacher came back into the room. They didn't address the class but walked over to a few specific kids and knelt beside their desks. I couldn't hear what they said, but it was quiet, clearly meant to be discreet. A minute later, those kids got up and followed the teachers into the hallway. No one really reacted. I felt like I was the only one who noticed. Miss Carter returned a few minutes later alone. She didn't mention the kids who left, just sat at her desk and started shuffling papers like nothing happened. But right after the fire alarm went off, Miss Carter didn't react like she expected it. She told us to line up and head outside, and we joined the rest of the school on the field behind the building. As usual, everyone was grouped by homeroom, so I stood with familiar faces again. But while we were there, I looked back at the school for no reason, just habit. I could have sworn I saw something move in a second-story window. It was quick, maybe a reflection or shadow, but it felt wrong. The school was supposed to be empty. I kept it to myself but was really scared about re-entering the building. We never did, though. Before the alarm stopped, we heard sirens. A few minutes later, police cars pulled into the lot. Not just one or two, but a whole line. Officers jumped out and rushed into the building. No one explained anything. Teachers just told us to stay calm and wait. After a while, someone said school was being let out early, no buses. We had to call our parents. My parents later told me what the school had shared. Apparently, a bunch of kids who didn't even go to our school had somehow gotten in. A rumor spread that they planned to set the place on fire. Miss Carter had found alarming tools in one of the kids' backpacks, and the school used the fire drill to flush everyone out. The details are fuzzy, so I hope I'm explaining it right. What really stuck with me was what my mom said: those kids had been let in by Nathan through the side fence during recess. The whole thing was so bizarre, it's still hard to process. I never saw Nathan again.